distinguished guests, Rabbi Cohn, Cantor Feller, members and friends of Adath Israel. Welcome to our second lecture on Adath Israel's Weekend Educational Institute called Kala. The Adult Education Committee is honored indeed to be able to bring to you American Jewry's foremost scholar, teacher, author, and lecturer, Dr. Mordecai Kaplan. His creative genius has given us such movements as the Reconstruction movement, the Teachers Institute at the seminary, and the Jewish Community Center movements. Last evening, we were privileged to hear Dr. Kaplan speak on Jewish identification. This evening, his talk will be on Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. After the lecture, we will entertain written questions. You have on your seats cards, pencils will be afforded to you, and we hope you will be able to get as many questions in as time will permit. It is with great pride that we present to you now Dr. Mordecai Kaplan.
Mr. Chairman, Rabbi Cohn, Cantor Feller, and friends. As you heard, the subject last night was Jewish identification. That is the question of who is a Jew or what is a Jew. The conclusion I arrived at in last night's lecture was that at the present time we are not in a position to answer that question. And I suggested that the only way to answer it is to organize a group of experts, specialists, namely scholars, thinkers, religionists, and to urge them to arrive at a definition of the term Jew. At the present time, as I quoted a great authority in one of the foremost Jewish encyclopedias of our day, saying there is no answer to the question of who is a Jew. And thus I left that question open. However, what I would like to suggest tonight is that there is a way of answering that question, although that does not dispense with the need of having a group of scholars and experts deal with it. Because the only possible answer to the question of who is a Jew will have to be a Jew is an adherent to or of Judaism. An adherent of Judaism. But then the question would be, what is Judaism? And that will have to be the question, really, that will have to be dealt with by the suggested conference. However, I would suggest to such a conference, if my advice were asked, what they ought to think of Judaism. And so I constitute myself the first member of that conference. If I were asked, what is Judaism, the first thing I would try to make clear is that we must learn to distinguish between Judaism and Jewish religion. It is a common mistake of most of us to use the two synonymously, to speak of Judaism as though it were entirely synonymous with Jewish religion and vice versa. But the fact is that Jewish religion covers only a part, even though it be the central part of Judaism. When we speak of Judaism, we ought to think of it in the same way, or in analogous fashion to that in which we would think of the term Americanism. Offhand, it would not occur to you to think of Americanism as having anything to do with religion. But the fact is that such a thing as American religion is conceivable. It's possible. In fact, I think that in time there will be a definite American religion, because every people, as a people or nation, is bound to develop a religion of its own. In fact, it already has it, except that it doesn't know it and hasn't given it a name. In fact, there is the beginning already of an American religion you have in Thanksgiving Day, which is a universal day, is celebrated by the entire American people in a religious spirit, as a religious festival, and in a sense Memorial Day is a religious day. July 4th, they've stopped using firecrackers, and it has not yet become a religious day, but time will come when it will be, the day of Declaration of Independence, and all of this will form part of American religion. But when such a religion arises, it certainly will not be synonymous with Americanism, because Americanism covers a very broad and extensive area of American national experience and life. And the same is true of the distinction between Judaism and Jewish religion. Let us therefore first understand what we mean by Judaism. And please note in the outline that you have before you the first definition that we have here of Judaism. Judaism, notice I at once define it, or that which unites successive generations of Jews. Successive generations of Jews. That means to say that which unites us to our great-great-grandfathers, to our ancestors more than 3,000 years ago, is Judaism. That which unites the successive generations of Jews, and all Jews of each generation, is more than a religion. But is it more than a religion? It is a dynamic, that means evolutionary, developing, not static, not fixed. Already you have a term which should set you thinking, namely that Judaism is not a fixed, not a static thing. It is a dynamic, religious, yes, it has religion, or Jewish religion, but it is more than a religion, because it is a civilization. So, what is Judaism? Judaism is a dynamic, religious civilization, and as such, consists of three elements: peoplehood, culture, and religion. Now I define each of these three elements. Peoplehood. Peoplehood is a sense, it's a feeling. Peoplehood is not something that you see, but something that you feel, and that each individual feels. Each individual member of a people has a sense of peoplehood. Peoplehood is a sense of oneness and mutual responsibility. That is, of course, experienced by each individual. Mutual responsibility which unites people by virtue of what? What unites them? The fact that they have a common history. These people have a common history, a social heritage, that means a tradition which is built up with each generation and handed down as a heritage, as a social heritage, and also common hopes for the future and ideals for the future. In other words, a common past, a common present, and a common future in common. That state of mind satisfies the need of the individual to belong to a group that has a past, to be proud of and a future to look forward to. In other words, this sense of peoplehood is part of the normal mentality or psychology of an individual human being. In fact, it is part of that psychology which unfortunately even the latest psychiatrists very often overlook and therefore do not always really understand their patients or know how to cure them, because they do not appreciate the fact that a normal person needs to belong. The desire to belong, not merely to a club, which is, of course, natural and ever-present, but that isn't enough. We, of course, want to belong to a family. We have to belong. A person that is not identified with a family feels lost in the world. And to be a family, that family itself has to belong to a people or nation or church that consecrates the family. How does it consecrate the family? By, of course, legalizing the marriage. This little ceremony of legalizing the marriage is the way in which a whole nation consecrates the family, and it becomes a source of authority that determines what the family can do or what it cannot do. It has the right over the children, has the right over the relations between husband and wife. It can dictate things which it could not do if it had not legal right over the family and constituted it. Therefore, to be a human being, normally, you must feel you're a member of a family, and that family is recognized as a legal institution, as legally institutionalized by the nation. Therefore, the individual naturally wants to belong to a permanent group, to a group that has a past to be proud of. That means to a nation or to a church or to a people or to a community, if you will, world community or a fellowship, whatever name, or society. But the point is that it must be a permanent society. And because it is a permanent society, it has a past. But it must be the kind of a past of which the individual has reason to be proud. Otherwise, he would not want to belong to it. And secondly, it must be a society which has something to look forward to. It wants to be great. For example, at the present time, a Frenchman is very much concerned over the fact, as a result of de Gaulle's having assumed the presidency, concerned over the fact that they must achieve greatness. Greatness. This is what de Gaulle now has contributed to French life and has helped to put new vitality into the French nation. Because to be a Frenchman, it is not enough to have a glorious past. You must have a glorious future to look forward to. And to be a Jew, the individual must feel that the people to which he belongs has a past to be proud of. That's easy enough because the Goyim already recognize that the Jews have a past to be proud of. What the Goyim don't recognize is that the Jews have a future to look forward to. They don't recognize it because the Jews themselves are not so sure that they have a future to look forward to. They don't know what their future is. That's our trouble. And because we have no definite idea what our future is to be, we are not as yet a people. We cannot give the individual that which he so much needs as a Jew, namely a future to look forward to. We've begun to give him something to look forward to in the establishment of the State of Israel. That's why the establishment of the State of Israel has brought new life into Judaism. Without it, we would not have had anything to be able to point to as a future to look forward to. The only thing is that it is too limited in its possibilities. It cannot be a future for all the Jews, since it is not possible for all the Jews to be crowded into Eretz Israel. But even that fact does not prevent the Jews who are to remain outside from identifying themselves with the development in the State of Israel, making it its object of concern. And that very experience of making the development of Israel an object of concern is an experience which enables each individual Jew, even outside Israel, to have a future to look forward to, because each of us in America is as much interested, almost as much, certainly from the standpoint of our Judaism, as to what is going to happen with the state of Israel as are the inhabitants of the state of Israel itself. That's one element, peoplehood. Now comes the second element, which is part of Judaism, namely culture. What is culture? Culture consists of a way of life with its customs, standards, laws, folkways, and mores. Mores means recognized customs which are almost a touch upon morals in a sense, and the means of self-expression, the language, self-expression and communication, literature, art, whatever it be, that helps people to communicate with one another, whereby people are made aware of the highest values they cherish in common: poetry, music, symbolism, the plastic and dramatic arts. A third element, religion. What is religion? It is the pattern of beliefs and practices which are intended to give meaning to life as a whole. In short, it is a belief in God, because the belief in God is fundamentally intended to make life itself, with all its difficulties, with all its problems, with all its troubles and dangers and anxieties, after all, to have it make sense, to enable us to feel that life is worthwhile. That fundamentally is the function of the belief in God. And a civilization normally must contain such beliefs about life, about the world, about man, as enable us to meet with difficulties, as impel us to do our best and to withstand the worst that may befall us. A civilization that lacks that element lacks soul. And that's why I say, I believe in Americanism to the extent of assuming that it will develop soul, spirit, namely certain ideas as Americans, which ought to have the effect that I ascribe to religion. Therefore, there will be an American religion. But in the meantime, I'm concerned with the Jewish religion. And in fact, this Jewish religion is to serve as a model and a method for whatever religion each nation is going to develop in the future. But first, let us understand our own religion. Religion is a pattern of beliefs and practices which are intended to give meaning to life as a whole, and to activate, to bring into action the loyalties on which both the first two elements, namely peoplehood and the way of life, are based. That is to not only to make us feel that we belong to the Jewish people, but to translate that feeling into action that is meaningful. The same is not merely to be loyal to the culture, to the ways and laws and standards of the Jewish people, but to actually translate it into life. All that constitutes, the motive to bring that about constitutes religion. Now these three elements, please note, these three elements are interdependent. Changes in the one necessitate changes in the other two. Now notice the word change. Remember I said at the very beginning of this outline, you have the term dynamic. The idea that Judaism is a living process. And as a living process, it cannot be at a standstill. Unfortunately, we have somehow had it bred into us that a religion must be something that is eternal and static and unchangeable. Immutable is the word. Immutable. I contend that was the idea they had in the past. There are lots of things that in the past were wrong as far as the future is concerned. And we have learned to associate with life not the thing that is static, but that which makes it, that which enables it to change and to live amid change or changes. Now, after this introduction, then comes Division 1, Roman numeral 1. Judaism, far from being a static civilization, in line with what I've just said, has undergone, now notice the word, metamorphosis. Now, I go very far in the idea of Judaism as a changing, developing, evolving civilization, so far as to use the word metamorphosis, not merely change. Metamorphosis is a special kind of change. It is a change. The term metamorphosis means change in the structure. The very structure of Judaism has changed, and yet it has remained the same. Now we know in ordinary annual existence there's such a thing as metamorphosis. We are familiar with for example, a butterfly. We know that a butterfly, before it becomes a butterfly, is a caterpillar. And before it becomes a caterpillar, it's a chrysalis. Now, the chrysalis and the caterpillar and the butterfly are the same creature, or the tadpole and the frog, same creature. Tadpole's on the water, and then when it develops lungs, comes out and land. It's the same creature, but it has a different structure. Now, the same thing can happen to a civilization. A civilization certainly can undergo metamorphosis, and only when it undergoes metamorphosis is it able really to live, because the changes are so in the environment, in man's environment, are so great that unless it adapts itself to the new conditions, it cannot survive. Therefore, what has enabled Judaism to survive when other civilizations perished? Why did the Greek civilization, the Roman civilization, Babylonian, Egyptian, and so on, why did they perish? Because they were unable to metamorphose themselves, not really change themselves. That is, to remain continuous, the same, despite change. Now, please look again. Judaism, far from being a static civilization, has undergone metamorphosis or transformation more than once. Were it not for the sense of continuity with which the Jewish people has succeeded in maintaining throughout these changes or metamorphoses, each new stage of Judaism would have been regarded as a new civilization. Now that sounds abstract, but when you come to the second part of the outline, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Secondly, that unique capacity of the Jewish people, I think we ought to be able to grasp at once. The capacity of the Jewish people, that is, the Jewish people has a certain ability which no other people has so far been able to display. What has given the Jewish people that capacity, no one knows. Any more than you can explain what has given Shakespeare his genius, or Mozart or Beethoven their genius. There's no way of telling. So it happened that the Jewish people has had a remarkable capacity to keep on changing and yet to remain the same. I say that unique capacity of the Jewish people is in need now of being exercised again by us. We've had that capacity till now, but now we have to exercise it again if we wish the Jewish people to survive. Only, please notice now the part that is underlined. Only deliberate reconstruction of our Jewish social structure, a reconstruction, a complete overhauling of our social structure, whatever there is to it. What social structure is there? Well, we consist of synagogues, congregations, centers, federations, community councils, and so on, hospitals, homes for the aged, a conglomerate of, really, we are not a structure. We're just like a house, that is to say, people are moving from one home to the other with all the furniture in a van. That's the condition today of the Jewish people. The Jewish people is in a van moving. They don't know where they're moving to, but somehow they're in a van. And they think that that's all right. That, why, look, you can arrange, the chair very in a van. You want to pack it well, you can organize it. That's the kind of organization Jewish life has today. As good moving people know how to put the furniture, a lot of furniture crowded into the van. But that's not having the furniture in the home. We have no home. Part of it, there is now just a little home in Adath Israel for 2 million Jews. It'll be, you can put in another million, maybe 2 million, but by the time you put in 2 more million, there will be 6, 7 more million outside at least. So how can you say we have a home? We are at home. We still keep our furniture in a van. I say then that only deliberate reconstruction of our Jewish social structure and our Jewish way of life, that's the second element, culture, and Jewish religion. Now, I hope you don't think I'm saying something that is very unconventional, maybe, but that we have to be prepared to deal with the fact that Jewish religion must also undergo reconstruction with a view to what? To the realities and needs of our day, not just abstract. What do we need? Only that can prevent Judaism from being fossilized, or give the Jewish people, or save the Jewish people from disintegration. Today the Jewish people is in a state of disintegration. Let's not fool ourselves. Even in the state of Israel, unless something be done with the whole Jewish people, both in and outside Israel. Because in Israel, if things are not taken in hand, they will develop an Israeli nation, but not a Jewish people. Thirdly, when I say Israeli nation, that means you'll have Arabs and you'll have Christians, and even though they be a minority, you can't tell, Arabs see to it that they should always remain being the majority, an easy way nowadays. And thirdly, if we are to foster the much-needed reconstruction of our day, we have to be imbued. So there is need for that kind of radical reconstruction. But if we are to foster the much-needed reconstruction for our day, we have to be imbued with a vivid awareness of the two distinct stages through which Judaism passed before it became the Judaism of tradition. In other words, we have really to become convinced of the fact that the Judaism which has come down to us from our parents, grandparents, what we remember of that Judaism, that was by no means the original Judaism. On the contrary, it had already undergone 2 stages before that. I will have occasion to point out to you. The first stage is simply unrecognizable as Judaism. Second stage, while it is recognizable, is so different from the kind of Judaism, for example, at which we make Havdalah, or you have the kind of services we have on a Friday night. Totally different. And we've got to be convinced by having a very vivid picture, mind picture, of the different stages of Judaism in order, you see, that we should not be afraid. We must not be afraid of reconstructing Judaism today in accordance with the demands of the realities of today. I say such an awareness, and here, please note, the third line from the bottom, such an awareness would not only dispel the fear of Reconstructionism or metamorphosis, it would also indicate the lines of development that are needed to help us retain our sense of continuity. With the past, as well as point to the direction in which our destiny lies. Well, I'm glad to see that you're following. I was waiting.
Rabbi, your cut was just a little different. It's the same thing, but there's another page.
Oh, I see. I understand now. Well, I'm glad to see that you're not only following, but that you are not getting ahead of me. My own outline was different. Now, you know what you have here? This is a map. Although it's made up of words and not of lines, it's a map. You see, a map of space is made up of lines. The map that you use when you go touring, you use the car to help you find your way to where you want to get to your destination. It's not made up of, there of course are words giving directions of some kind, but the main part which guides you is made of lines. But this is a map intended to have you drive over 3,200 years of time. It's a map in time to orient you, to help you find yourselves in the various periods of our history, or the history of Judaism. Now notice the top divisions which divides the history of Judaism, the development of Judaism from 3,200 years ago about, these are round numbers, from 3,200 to 2,500 years ago is the first stage, which in fact would more properly be called proto-Judaism instead of Judaism. It is so different from the Judaism that we know and that we don't keep, you know. But I mean, at least some of us have some idea of what it is, that we would hardly recognize it as the same. But yet, when you look carefully, you see that it has all the elements that go to make up the Judaism that we know. From 3,200 to 2,500 years ago is the first stage. From 2,500 years ago to 1,900 years ago is the second stage. And the third is from 1,900 years ago to 175 years ago. And now the fourth stage is in the making. Now, what marks off these periods? 2,500 years ago is, in round numbers, the time when the first Commonwealth was destroyed, the first temple. And the temple, of course, was usually the capital of the state, of the country. So what I have in the first three boxes represents what Jewish life was, or proto-Jewish life was, in the first stage of its development. And then the second stage begins with the destruction of the second Commonwealth. The second Commonwealth existed a little less than 2,500 years ago to, roughly speaking, 1,900 years ago. Actually, the temple, the second Commonwealth, was destroyed in the year 70. The year 70 of the Common Era. The first Commonwealth was destroyed in the year 586 before the Common Era. And then why the number 175? Well, that is, roughly speaking, the period of the American-French revolutions, particularly the French Revolution, particularly the year 1791. That means 9 plus 59, to be accurate. But then if you it really begins with the adoption of the of the American Constitution, which will be about 10 years beyond that, so that from that time on, a new era begins for Judaism throughout the world. Now, you notice I discuss each of these stages in accordance with the three main divisions of what goes to make up Judaism: peoplehood, culture, religion. Now notice a kind of society, of course, I describe what was the nature of peoplehood during that particular period in each of these stages. The same way of life is the culture, as I say. What is culture? A way of life. And finally, religion, I use the very term. Now, let us just pass over the first stage and the three elements of that stage. What kind of a people were our ancestors during that first stage? They really were not a nation, and they were not a people, and they were not a church. Our ancestors in that proto-Jewish stage were a tribal confederation. They consisted first of 12 tribes, and then the 10 tribes, about, 9.5 tribes, were destroyed before the end of that period. But on the whole, throughout that period, except toward the end, they were not a real nation, though they wanted to become a nation. They wanted to become a nation from the very beginning, 3,200 years ago, when the time they left Egypt and went through the wilderness and entered the promised land. It was with the idea of becoming a nation, but it takes a long time. It takes a long time, particularly in the past. It took a very long time for a group of people to solidify into a nation. And so they remained for a long time merely a kind of confederacy of tribes on the way to becoming an organic nation. Now, still they were for a time united under David and Solomon, but about 80 years. In the period, you notice, in the 700 years, 3,200 to 2,500 years ago, about 700, during that time, the only real national unity existed during the period of David and Solomon, 80 years. For the rest of the time, they were talking about becoming a nation without becoming one. Until some years, in 721, before the Common Era, the northern kingdom was destroyed. All what was left was Judah, mainly the tribe of Judah, and that's where you get the name Jewish. Jewish. Jewish means those who come from the main tribe of Judah that produced the King David and Solomon. Now, what was the way of life? According to tradition, the way of life during that period was that Torah, that scroll which is raised every time after the reading, and said this Torah is that which God gave to Israel through Moses. But that tradition, that belief, which tradition has brought down to us, it has been challenged and has been proved to be not altogether correct. The fact is that during that period, our ancestors were not governed by a kind of Torah, or that is written text, which has served as a constitution. That Torah, you know, is exactly for the Jewish people what a constitution is for the American people. Now, we know the American Constitution exactly when it was formulated because it's in very recent historic times. But the idea as to when that scroll, the contents of that scroll were formulated, is something that was believed in as a result of oral tradition from generation to generation. And as you know, anything that is not written down black on white by some authoritative person becomes a legend and develops all kinds of fanciful ideas. And so the origin of that has become the object of belief that it was all dictated by God to Moses, and this still functions in the prayer books. People say, rabbis declare it, and neither people nor rabbis believe in it. It's a very sad state of affairs, but the time has come when we've got to come to terms with the facts and the realities. And this was the reality, namely that during that time there was not a fixed way of life, but it was then how did our ancestors live if they did not have a constitution? The answer is they lived like all other peoples at that time, where guidance was communicated by elders. And there were people, leaders, known as elders, kenim, judges, shofetim, priests, kohanim, prophets, neviim, sages, chachamim, and soothsayers, charashim. You see, you have a Hebrew term for each of them. They had all kinds of people. Soothsayers there were many more soothsayers than you suspect. Almost every street had a soothsayer. Believe me, people consulted the soothsayers more than they did the sages. Certainly much more than the prophets. The soothsayers and the priests had a wonderful time. The judges, of course, when people were in trouble, people would go to the judge. And in the same way, the elders. The elders gradually disappeared from the scene. But the outcome of the best that all of these people had to say, to record, you see, the result of their decisions, their advice, were written down by some the most clever, the most knowledgeable people among them, and out of those writings emerged especially the priests and the sages. Those people were writing people. They wrote, and they wrote down. And so we have in the Torah those parts which we recognize were written by priests, and other parts which were written by sages. Prophets didn't do much writing. As a matter of fact, the prophets usually had secretaries. Sometimes the prophet himself didn't know how to write. He was inspired. He could talk. In the ancient times, very learned people didn't know how to write. But there were poets. They could speak or poetize extemporaneously under the inspiration which dominated them. And someone who was a disciple would sit down and write down, and that is now part of the Bible. So you have a picture of the first stage, how different that was from what became of Judaism in later stages. Now the most important part is, of course, the religion, which means the idea of God. What was the idea of God at that time? Now, it was an altogether different idea, except in the one element, namely in the idea of what we call not the oneness of God, but the onlyness of God. Onlyness, that there's only one God. That idea existed from the very beginning. And that idea that there is only one God is what made the Jewish people what it has been throughout the ages. Because the fact that there's only one God, how that fact came to be accepted, no one knows. But the fact is, and that is where the religious genius of the Jewish people lay. Somehow the idea that everything that exists is one, is interrelated. It's one universe, not only one world. Now, if everything, the reason everything is one, they said, because there's only one God. So everything is accountable to him. And out of that became, of course, he's the only creator of the world. There are other spirits, not only human beings, there are superhuman beings, or angels, but these angels are the creation of God. And what the other nations called gods were really angels. And those angels were made by the one, created by the one God. But the amazing fact is that with all the genius that enabled them to realize there's only one God, there was a very serious limitation in their idea. And that is, they had the idea that that one God made himself known, really manifested his Godhood only in them, the Jewish people. And they gave him a name. They called him by a proper noun, which in later times it became transgression to pronounce. It was forbidden to pronounce. But now it's not the only forbidden thing we have to resort to practice, because we have to understand one another. And so it has been discovered, as a matter of fact, the very pronunciation of that name. The very pronunciation was lost, was forgotten. And it was discovered very indirectly because on a monument way in Assyria, they discovered how that name was pronounced. Yud-He-Vav-He is the name of which was the name of the only God. And so you have in that which is the great declaration of the Jewish people, that which is the essence of Judaism, Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel. Now, the translation makes no sense. The fact is, everyone knows Shema Yisrael. We recite it with great eclat, but we really, I'm sure, with all due respect, that you're not aware what the Shema Yisrael means, because Jewish education has not yet caught up to the facts that we know about the Jewish religion. Please note that Jewish education has not yet caught up, even in its highest level, caught up to what we know. When I say we, I mean the experts, the scholars know about the Jewish religion. Now, if it hasn't caught up in the highest levels, how can you expect to have it catch up in your Sunday schools or in the day schools? And so we have to make you run very fast to catch up to what I'm telling you now. And this is what Shema Yisrael means. In English, it's translated, Hear O Israel. The children always think it means Hero Israel, H-E-R-O. That's the first thing they learn in Sunday school. Hear O Israel. Here, Shema, I mean, that's a proclamation. Oh, Israel. Israel, who is Israel? Israel, that's the entire Jewish people. That's peoplehood. The appeal, the call is not to the individual Jew. That's very important already. The religion of Judaism is not a religion of an individual. It becomes a religion of the individual who identifies himself with the Jewish people. Please remember that. It's very important. Therefore, if you don't identify with the Jewish people, you may have a belief in God, but it's not Jewish religion. Now, you say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. That's all wrong. The word the Lord, which you find all the time, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord, you know, that's a translation of a word in Hebrew that was substituted for the proper noun for God, the name of God. The name of God is spelled Yud-He-Vav-He, which is pronounced Yahweh. Yahweh, What Yahweh means, there are all kinds of books written about it, and nobody knows yet. Lots of things we don't know. But even what we know hasn't been caught up, so how can you expect people to catch up what we don't know? But they ought to catch up to know that they don't know. That's a good thing too, you know. The trouble is that we don't even know what we don't know. But actually, it's not the Lord. The substitute word is Adonai. Adonai means the Lord. It was substituted in order not to pronounce Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, whatever it's spelled, Yahweh. Not Jehovah. Jehovah shouldn't even be forbidden to pronounce from the traditional point of view. The Orthodox think that they don't even pronounce the word God. They spell God dash D. Please, it's not a curse. But they wouldn't spell out. But they certainly wouldn't spell out the word Jehovah, because they think that is the original pronunciation. Nothing of the kind. Jehovah is an indication by means of vowels, E-O-A, Adonai. You see, it's indicated that the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh should be pronounced Adonai, because there's another way of indicating. Sometimes in the book of Ezekiel, the same Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh occurs, but the vowels there indicate that same Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh should be pronounced Elohim. Altogether different word. Now Elohim means God. Adonai means Lord. Now, but the fact is, what it says is, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh, He is our God, not Baal, not Ashtoreth, not Nebo, all the whole series, and not Zeus, and not Jupiter, not Juno, and all, not all these, none of them. None of the other gods of the other nations is our God. Our God is Yahweh. Adonai Echad. Yahweh only. That's what Echad means, not one. Yahweh only. He is only. He alone. He alone. He alone is a God. Everywhere, somewhere else it explains it states very definitely, there is no other God. In heaven above and the earth beneath. And then, of course, you have the commandment not to make any image of God. Because to make an image of God tends to, or leads to the belief that there are other gods, because there are other images. Not because it is wrong to have an image idea of God, which is something that comes into Judaism later on. Therefore, now notice what I say, the kind of religion. Yahweh was exclusively the God of Israel. Now, our ancestors at that time were like the rest of the world. And although they were unique in many ways, and especially the idea that there was only one God, nevertheless they were like the rest and thought as all people in the climate of opinion of those days, and they had to have some visible object to identify even this invisible God. And you know what they had? The Ark of the Covenant. Not Noah's Ark. That was the symbol, please. It's the Ark of the Covenant. Now what is the Ark of the Covenant? Have we got now the Ark of the Covenant? No, we have only something to remind us. A box, something that contains the scrolls, which is to be a reminder of our ancestors having had an ark. But the Ark of the Covenant was an altogether different object from the one that people go up to and have trouble in opening. Usually when you call up one who has not experienced the synagogue attendance, he gets very nervous and he has to open, and the doors don't work usually. So, but there's very little in common between that which is called the ark. It's called the ark, but really has very little in common, I say, with what is called really the Ark of the Covenant. That was a box which contained something that later was said to be the Ten Commandments, inscribed on stone. Well, the fact is that it was lost with the destruction of the first temple, and really there is no historical evidence what it contained. There are all kinds of theories. I'm not going to elaborate on that. But the important thing about that ark was that it was intended to serve as a symbol of Yahweh's presence. In other words, that ark was a throne on which Yahweh was supposed to be sitting. And when it came among people, Yahweh was supposed to be there. And therefore it would come only among people in emergencies. And the greatest emergencies were what? Battle. When they faced an enemy and they needed the strength of their God, Yahweh, they would bring the ark into battle. Now if you want really to get the feeling of what God meant to them, go home and read the books, particularly of Samuel, the books of Samuel 1 and 2. And you'll find it almost as interesting as the Exodus, the book of Exodus. There are plenty of battles there, and so you'll enjoy it. And heroism and so on. Really do. And become acquainted with the Bible. And then you'll get, when you read those books, then you can get a vivid idea of what Jewish religion was like in its first stage. You know, now when you come in the service, when people open the ark, you recite, Vahi ben Soah Haron Vayomer Moshe, and it came to pass when the ark was about to journey, Moses would say, these are the words, Moses would say, arise, Yahweh, and let thine enemies be dispersed, and let those who hate thee flee before thee. When would he say that? The ark was a war emblem, because it meant that upon it sat Yahweh. Therefore, every time they would start, they would have to march into battle. This would be the war cry, a call upon Yahweh that he should get into action. Imagine, that is recited, the people standing there now before the ark, and there surely is no idea of battle or war or any such notions, very far. And right, the next verse is also from the Bible. The next verse says, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, for out of Zion will come forth the Torah, udevar Adonai Yerushalayim, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Do you know what the distance is in terms of this map between the first verse and this second verse, which is said together? You know how many years? 500 years. 5 centuries, at least. Yes, just around that time. Because Isaiah, to whom these words are ascribed in the book of Isaiah, was in the 8th century. And Moses was in the 13th. That makes 5 centuries difference before the common era. And now the two are recited, and you have the choir sing, and the cantor sometimes gets into trouble if they don't sing right, right? But imagine if you really can live through what these words say. You live through 500 years in 1 minute. And you get an idea what a people was, what our people was. A people, first degree, a fighting people, a desert people, a nomad people. From that time, the first verse. Second, prophet Isaiah foresees one world in which there is to be no war. For out of Zion will come forth the Torah, and everybody will accept the teaching that will emanate from Jerusalem. You see, in other words, that is the meaning. Just it shows you what the knowledge of the background of Judaism does for the understanding of the things that we do now so mechanically and are bored by most of the time. Now we come to the next stage. From 2500, I'm rushing now. I don't explain the rest. There's so much to say about this. From 2500 to 1900 years ago, the ecclesiastic is, you see, I call the first the monarchic stage because at that time the first commonwealth was marked by kingly rule. And so the palace was the symbol. It was a monarchic age. The next in 25, that's the second commonwealth, which was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era. That was ecclesiastic, as you will see. Then the Jews became whatever of the 12 tribes, whatever remained after the captivity in Babylon. They returned, they built up a theocratic nation. That is a nation ruled by those who speak in the name of God. Those were the priests. Instead, the elders and the judges and the prophets no longer functioned. There weren't anymore. And certain soothsayers, those were entirely forbidden. And authorities vested in the high priest, who later became king. Those, first, that is before the year 160, 65 and 60, when the Jews had to fight for their life against Syria, the Syrian kingdom, and they conquered under the Maccabees, the Hasmonean family, and the Maccabees, their descendants were at the same time high priests and also were known as kings. But the entire spirit was that of a theocracy. Then the way of life was, then you have actually that Torah, which is written, a real written constitution, a written Torah, which is taught by the priests and scribes. A new class of teachers arises. Scribes, they are the teachers who both, they had to write the text. You know, there were no printing shops, so every text had to be written by hand. And since the person who wrote by hand naturally knew the text, he would be the best qualified to teach. And you had, right, they would teach children and they would teach elders. And it was administered by elders. The religion of that time now it becomes no longer a God who has a proper name. The name is lost, substituted, you have the word Adonai, and so you have the God of Israel is to be recognized now by the other nations as the only God. Not only Israel, not only the Jewish people, but the rest, the entire world is now believed to be preparing itself for accepting the God of the Jews, the God of Israel. This is the period during which a new religious belief arose. Now, people have no idea, for example, that the belief in the resurrection, the belief in the world to come, that is to say, there is to be a different kind of a world in which the nature of the universe would be completely changed and all the evils and all the sufferings would be removed. That belief, those two ideas, Olam Haba and Tchiyat HaMetim, or as you pronounce it in Ashkenazic, Tchiyat HaMesim, the resurrection, which is still in the prayer book, and which conservative rabbis don't believe in. yet they say it, and they give it a different translation. If you look up in the translation of your prayer book, you will notice that it says, and everlasting life is translated. Now, that is a deliberate falsification. Absolute falsification. And I'm sorry to say, I'm sorry to see that such a thing should take place in a prayer book, where there was insistence, there were so many struggles. I mean, if those two words at least had been allowed to stand without any challenge and without question as to what it meant, you say, well, this is what we mean by it now. But the fact is that when the Maimonides suggested that there will be resurrection, he believed, but he said even after people are resurrected, they'll die a second time. Well, then of course, then what's the good of resurrection if people are going to die a second time? We said he's sorry, but anything that is a compound must break up, and so it's impossible for a body to live forever. And the only thing is everlasting life. But then for that he was banned. And now you have that they translate, you have the words. If you change the word, use the word everlasting life. What's wrong with it? If you believe in everlasting life, say it. Say it in all languages. Don't say it, don't have double speak. I mean, this is, you see, there are many inconsistent practices. Inconsistency in religion is intolerable, in my opinion. I think the one thing that a religion should stand for should be forthrightness, honesty, intelligibility, and consistency. But we can understand what's right or wrong if you know the background. And we can know what's right. And people ought to know. And not just insist blindly. They don't follow the rabbi. They dictate to usually the rabbi. The rabbi wants to change. He's up against a stone wall, usually. It's a very unusual congregation. You must be very unusual, I don't know. I don't know whether you're usual or unusual. Anyhow, the God of Israel to be recognized by the other nations as the only God, and then there arose the belief in the resurrection, the world to come, where salvation is achieved. This world cannot be the place where human being can achieve the self-fulfillment. And you know where that belief came from? From Zoroastrianism, from Persian religion. Those two beliefs. So nothing, our religion, our Jewish religion, wasn't hurt at all by adopting belief from other religions, as long as they actually believed and incorporated them into their own religion. Now, if we understand that, maybe we can learn something, if not from other religions, at least from other philosophies. Why not? You see, if you know that fact, and you say, now look, it managed to survive, not only survive, it helped, it vitalized Jewish religion. Maybe at the present time, let us say, supernaturalism. Supernaturalism is now passé in the climate of opinion. Every person that goes to a high school knows that the only thing that actually obtains in the world is what you call nature. Therefore, why not make it part of religion and see that whatever we believe about God be made compatible with our conception of nature, but not accept something which really we don't believe in or give some fanciful allegorical interpretation to. Now the third stage from 1900 to 175 years ago is the rabbinic. And the dominant institution, notice each one has a dominant institution. Palace, temple, yeshiva. Now, the yeshiva is the characteristic institution of the entire period from 1900 to 175. Therefore, when you have a yeshiva university, that means that the university has not recognized the existence of the last 175 years. I mean, it still lives, you see, in the year 1900, or 1900 years ago. But that is, if you want to know what is Yeshiva University, the spirit, there you have in the third column here. The spirit of the Yeshiva University of Orthodoxy is represented right here. Orthodoxy means, or traditional Judaism, this is traditional Judaism. The kind of society, a dispersed nation, segregated from other nations in a state of alienage. Ngolas, fertig. That is satisfied. As a matter of fact, from a purely traditional standpoint, it's wrong. It was wrong to go and try to build up a Jewish state. What do you mean? You've got to wait till the Messiah comes along. And he's got to be sent by God and perform miracles to prove that he's Messiah. And you have the Adath Israel, the most orthodox representative group in Jewish life, actually fought Zionism just as the American Council for Judaism. You see, in the same in the same category, two extremes: the American Council for Judaism and the Adath Israel, fighting the existence of Zionism. Now, of course, they accept it, but unwillingly. The way of life during that period was a written and oral tradition. You see, the first period was only a written Torah, but in course of time they developed just as the American Constitution. What do you have? Challenges that are brought to court, and then you have Supreme Court decisions which are interpretations of the Constitution. The Supreme Court decisions in constitutional law are the oral law of America. And in the same way, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Gemara constitute both the decisions and the discussion of the decisions. The decisions are in the Mishnah, the discussions are in the Gemara. And the two together constitute the oral tradition, interpreted and administered by rabbis. Now you have a new class of leaders, spiritual leaders, rabbis. There were, during that time, brief eras of limited cultural contact with non-Jewish civilizations. What is known as the Golden Era of Spain. In Spain, where Jews were in contact with the best thought at that time of the Muslim world, which was much far ahead of the Christian world in those centuries. The 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, Islam, or Mohammedan religion, Mohammedan civilization was far ahead of Christian. In fact, Christianity learned, just as Judaism learned, from Mohammedan civilization. And that was, as I say, an era of cultural contact with non-Jewish civilizations, and the outstanding product, philosophers, thinkers like Sadia, Ibn Gabiro, Maimonides. And thirdly, the religion. At this time, the unity of God is given what is metaphysical, that is philosophical significance, meaning in terms of what philosophers like Aristotle and Plato had to say about God. Their thinking was embodied in Jewish religion, and it was embodied for two purposes. On the one hand, to negate dualism, that is, to deny, to combat, to fight the tendency of people to believe in fact, in Christianity, you have the belief in Satan as the power of evil. Satan is almost as strong as God, or certainly was in Persian religion. And Trinitarianism is the Trinity, belief in the three gods: the God, the Father, and the Holy Ghost. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The development at that time of prayer worship as a substitute for the sacrificial cult, because the temple was not in existence, and so they developed prayer worship by means of prayers instead of animal sacrifice. And now we come to the present age. What is it going to look like? And so we come to the development to what Judaism, after having gone through these metamorphoses, is about to achieve a new metamorphosis, which will look something like the following. First place, it is going to be democratic in character. Namely that the people, not only leaders, will have a say in what is to be Judaism, And the typical institution will have to be of two kinds. On the one hand, the Hebrew University in Israel, which will represent the unity of the Jewish people, and there will be not Jewish university, but universities of Judaism in the diaspora. That means there will be special institutions for the teaching of every aspect of Judaism, not merely theology, but art, and literature, and history, and all forms of cultural expression. The Jewish people will have to become the new kind of society. You see, we will have to become a people. That means formally it will have to be organized just as the American people, the American nation is organized through a formal constitution. A constitution will have to be written on the basis, in a sense, of the past, but at the same time that will reckon with the actual distribution of the Jews in the world, with the core in Israel and the organic communities in the diaspora. The way of life will have to be a renaissance of Jewish civilization in Israel, the full Jewish civilization in all its aspects, and evolving a way of living in two civilizations in the diaspora. In America, for example, we are Americans as Jews. We live as Americans. In American civilization, we have to live as Jews in Jewish civilization. That means we have to live in two civilizations. In that respect, we're not alone in the world. In fact, every nation will have to do that in time, in a sense, so long particularly as Christianity exists. Every Catholic lives in two civilizations. As a matter of fact, he lives more in the Catholic civilization than he does in the American. His schooling, his education begins from kindergarten through universities, and the chain of American Catholicism, Catholic institutions, is a tremendously powerful one and very formative of Catholic civilization in America. We tend to underestimate its political and spiritual influence altogether. The fact is that America has to accept the Catholic world, and by the same token, it will have to accept Jewish civilization in symbiosis, that is to say, living together with it. Religious pluralism and diversity in unity will have to be part of Jewish life itself. Judaism, as a civilization, must make room for different interpretations of religion. Now, the idea of God must also be brought up to date. You see, again, transformed, metamorphosed, reconstructed, and come to mean as the power for salvation through nature and man. That is, God is everything in the universe and everything in man that cooperate to enable man to achieve the best that is in him, and as I said in the beginning, to withstand the worst that can befall him. Man's destiny is to become fully human. And instead of having one formula prayer, we must allow for a variety of prayer worship and ritual practice. That is what Jewish life must become if there is to be Jewish life in the future, and I'm confident there will be.
Once again, Dr. Kaplan has caught us up in his thinking like the wind has caught the leaf. It'll take us a while to settle down, I think. We have time now for questions and answers. Before you, or on your seats, you had cards. And if you need pencils, I have some. They'll be on the table. Perhaps some of the committee will distribute them. And then we will... We have enough questions to last us about 4 more evenings. Dr. Kaplan will do his best to answer those he believes are germane to the issue tonight.
Well, in a sense, every question is germane to the issues discussed, because I did nothing less than discuss 3,000 years of Judaism. So I at least ought to have 1 year to answer the questions. In any event, I shall try to do the best I can. The first question, I'll answer the questions in the order in which they arrived. First come, first served. What effect did the adoption of the American Declaration of Independence have upon Judaism so as to provide the demarcation of the commencement of the present trend? Well, it was not the Declaration of Independence. I believe the questioner has reference to the American Constitution. The Constitution, which separated church from state, had the effect of giving the Jews civic equality and emancipating the Jews from the medieval disabilities. And the challenge of the emancipation is the one that marks the beginning of the present trend in Judaism. The fact that as a result of emancipation, Jews have to become citizens of the nations that first simply permitted them to live among them. Now they can become an integral part of those nations. Now that means they have to accept their culture, their language, their spiritual life, so that the problem of how to live in two civilizations is the result of the law, separation of state and church, which became law with the passing of the adoption of the American Constitution. Next question, can you enlighten us with a list of the few more specific items that are necessary to reconstruct and to reconstruct our culture and religion of Judaism as we enter the space age of man? Well, I feel I've assigned enough of a job with a few items that I mentioned. All possible items are included under the three headings that I gave, namely the order, the kind of society, the way of life, and the idea of God or religion. Now, I don't know what more specific items I would enumerate. I would recommend certain books that deal with the specific items, like Judaism as a Civilization, The Future of the American Jew, Questions Jews Ask, of whom yours truly happens to be the author. The Meaning of God in Modern Jewish Religion, the Judaism in Transition, if you want a few more, and so on. You talk of reconstructing the Jewish religion. What form of reformation would you advocate? Again, that question is answered in detail in those books. I can't help being a salesman now. What do you mean by the man's destiny to become fully human? Well, by that I mean developing, we used to say the classic answer was to live in accordance with the three principles of the true, the good, and the beautiful. That was the classic, the Greek philosophic answer. I would translate those into Jewish terms by saying, instead of mere truth, I would say reliability. To be so honest as to be reliable. Reliability. Just instead of merely the good, I would say responsibility. To live, to act out one's responsibilities. And instead of the beautiful, I would say creativity. A person who is reliable and responsible and creative is fully human. Of course, there's no limit to the extent to which you can be. That depends upon your mental abilities, your physical powers, your connections, and so on. But to use all your potentialities and opportunities along these three lines to the maximum degree, that's to be fully human. I think it's a very specific and very simple way of understanding what we as human beings are meant to live for. Unfortunately, everything else is in religion, so they begin with ideals, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, which is, in first place, very hard to do, particularly if he happens to be making very loud use of the television or the radio. Keeps on going, trying to love your neighbors yourself, very hard. And in the name of loving our neighbors ourselves, a person like Torquemada used to burn people alive, Jews in particular, because he loved the Jews so much that he wanted to save their souls. And the only way he could think of saving their souls was by burning their bodies. So, if, however, Mr. Torquemada had been told that more important than loving your neighbor is being honest and being reliable and being responsible for the happiness of other people, being mutually responsible and allowing the freedom which enables people to be creative, I think he would have had a different idea of what is the destiny of man to become human, fully human. When you see, in spite of the fact that you have even 3 religions, in a sense, all religions, I think it's a mistake of all religions to say that the primary destiny of the human being is to develop the law of love. Yes, that must come as a result, in the first place, of being true to oneself, of being reliable, because reliability is not merely a law of man. That's nature's law, because there is law in the world. There is natural law means that the universe is reliable, and that makes reliability the quality of God. That's divine. And the same is true of responsibility, interaction. And creative means the freedom, because the world goes on and on being created anew all the time, evolving. That's God. And if man does not evolve, does not create, he cannot be human. And he cannot be human because he lacks that divine quality. That is the meaning of man in the image of God. Now, they did not understand that to be the meaning in the past. They only knew that man's got to be like God, but they didn't understand yet what God was. I mean, our ancestors, the tradition, they couldn't have understood what God meant because they had no idea what the moon was, what the earth was. They thought the earth was flat, and the roof, there was a crystalline roof known as the heavens, the sky. They thought the rain came from up there, above the waters, above the heavens. How could they know what God is? They didn't know what, they looked at the sky and didn't know what it was. If you look at a picture and you don't understand what the picture says, how can you know what the artist is? How can you know the artist? If they saw the world and didn't know the world, how could they know the creator of the world or what God is? And why should it be hold? If we were born in those days, we wouldn't be any smarter, believe me. When we recite the Shema, as it has been recited for generations, are we supposed to believe in it? And if we are, as it has been recited for generations, are we supposed to believe in it? That is, to believe in it as the generations believed? I don't quite understand the question. We're not supposed to believe in it as the generations believed in it. We are supposed to understand it in a deeper sense. In other words, we are supposed, when we recite the Shema today, we are to know that our ancestors grasped the idea that there's only one God. Now, it was that belief, as I said before, that made our ancestors into the people that they became. Now we can say that there's only one God in a much deeper and truer sense than they could possibly have grasped. All the better. Then goes on, and if we are what we are, if we are to recite it, what are we to teach our children when we rise up and when we lie down, as is present as or in the past indoctrinations? Sorry, I can't explain myself with a pen. I mean, the question which this person wants to ask is really, now that we know the historical background of those words, how shall we teach the Shema? Which is a very relevant question, very much germane to what I said. I said, then the way to teach them, of course, in the first place, you make sure that they, when they say "Hear, O Israel," they don't say "Hear, O Israel." You explain to them what the term Israel means. That's very important. And you say that this is a call to the entire Jewish people. And you get to spend hours and hours, especially with young children, making the Jewish people visible to them, and tangible, and telling them as much as you possibly can, telling them that all that they study in history is to make them understand just that one word, and that everything they learn in Jewish history should help them understand that one word. And when they understand that word, then they are prepared to understand the next few words. And that's why it is necessary to do what the passage following says. You must teach them all the time. When thou walkest by the way, and thou risest up and thou liest down, that means everything that has to do with Jewish life throughout the 3,000 years has to be known for us to fully grasp the meaning of that one great announcement to the world, to Israel, to the Jewish people first, and through them to the rest of the world. And namely that we are the only people in the world that took the idea of God and defined it as stating that there's only one God in the world, and that we are a people because we dedicate ourselves to doing that which we regard as His will. What is His will? For that we have a Torah which spells out what we are to regard as the will of God. That's all that you have to teach the children. Therefore, it takes a lifetime to know what we should regard the will of God. And as we grow older, you have to explain to children, particularly when they're very young, that when they grow older, they will understand more than it is possible for them to understand now what is the will of God. When they actually are older, when they get to be teenagers, then they are ready to be told that what the ancients regarded as the will of God is in large part really the will of God. Why? Because it helps to make man fully human. Namely, it helps to make man reliable, responsible, and creative. But that was their ideas. In many ideas, they were mistaken. We have learned by experience that other things are necessary, and some of the things they regard as necessary, we do not regard. For example, there's a whole book devoted to the idea that in order to do the will of God, we have to bring sacrifices, animal sacrifices. We have to have a temple and come there and bring animal sacrifices, meal sacrifices, oil sacrifices. Now we know that that's a wrong idea of the will of God. We know that prayer, worship in words, is a better expression of the will of God. You see now, in other words, and it may well be that particular prayers which were regarded as expressing that which God would want us to say may have outlived their time. New prayers have to be formulated. Change, development, that you have to teach the children when they are ready to understand that a thing can remain the same and yet change. And that is when they get to their teens. Therefore, any Jewish education, as I had occasion to express last night, does not put a center of gravity in the teenage period. The teenage, especially the higher teenagers, unless it does that, simply is like putting up a foundation of a house without putting up the house on it. The children in the elementary schools, and the Sunday schools, and even the day schools, that go only as far as even including the high schools, are like foundations without a house on them. They can't live in that kind of a foundation. Their Judaism, if it remains, is just a blind, habitual Judaism, and usually it drops off altogether. Will the Constitution for Jews bring about a central headquarters in Israel similar to Catholic Rome? It will be a central headquarters in Israel, but it will not be similar to Catholic Rome. Because, as you remember, I made the point that the new stage has to be democratic. And that is exactly why I said it, because people's idea of the future is like that which the Catholics have at present. God forbid. We cannot conceive of such a thing as infallibility. That belonged to the past. We also had our doctrine. The tradition was regarded as infallible, as immutable. The idea of infallibility is gone. Why? Because we believe in change. We believe in development. And since you believe in development, you can't have infallibility. Therefore, you can't have a pope. You can't have anything like Catholic Rome. But you can have a central headquarters as you have a government, democratic government. And so in religion, you can have the expression of democratic spirit. Historians or objective recorders do not paint an alarming picture as you appear to. They indicate a resurgence or revival of Judaism, pointing out that Judaism is stronger in numbers as well as in spirit than it has been in several generations. Please explain what we are to regard as the will of God. That's all that you have to teach the children. Therefore, it takes a lifetime to know what we should regard the will of God. And as we grow older, you have to explain to children, particularly when they're very young, that when they grow older, they will understand more than it is possible for them to understand now what is the will of God. When they actually are older, when they get to be teenagers, then they are ready to be told that what the ancients regarded as the will of God is in large part really the will of God. Why? Because it helps to make man fully human. Namely, it helps to make man reliable, responsible, and creative. But that was their ideas. In many ideas, they were mistaken. We have learned by experience that other things are necessary, and some of the things they regard as necessary, we do not regard. For example, there's a whole book devoted to the idea that in order to do the will of God, we have to bring sacrifices, animal sacrifices. We have to have a temple and come there and bring animal sacrifices, meal sacrifices, oil sacrifices. Now we know that that's a wrong idea of the will of God. We know that prayer, worship in words, is a better expression of the will of God. You see now, in other words, and it may well be that particular prayers which were regarded as expressing that which God would want us to say may have outlived their time. New prayers have to be formulated. Change, development, that you have to teach the children when they are ready to understand that a thing can remain the same and yet change. And that is when they get to their teens. Therefore, any Jewish education, as I had occasion to express last night, does not put a center of gravity in the teenage period. The teenage, especially the higher teenagers, unless it does that, simply is like putting up a foundation of a house without putting up the house on it. outlived their time, new prayers have to be formulated. Change, development, that you have to teach the children when they are ready to understand that a thing can remain the same and yet change. And that is when they get to their teens. Therefore, any Jewish education, as I had occasion to express last night, does not put a center of gravity in the teenage period. The teenage, especially the higher teenagers, unless it does that, simply is like putting up a foundation of a house without putting up the house on it. The children in the elementary schools, and the Sunday schools, and even the day schools, that go only as far as even including the high school, or objective recorders, do not paint an alarming picture as you appear to. They indicate a resurgence or revival of Judaism, pointing out that Judaism is stronger in numbers as well as in spirit than it has been in several generations. Please explain. Well, I had occasion last night. How many of you were present last night? Well, those of you who will, therefore, please, you can think of something else, but I'm going to repeat. I said there were, when a person goes for a checkup to a doctor, there are two kinds of doctors. One kind of doctor will tell him, you'll discover there's something wrong with a person. He'll say to him, yes, it's true, but I tell you, the best thing for you is forget it. Because if you're going to think about it, things are going to get worse. Forget it. Another kind of a doctor says, let me see, what's the matter? And he studies the case, he diagnoses, and he realizes that if the man is going to forget it, it'll get worse. So he tells him exactly what the trouble is with him, and he suggests a cure. Well, I am the second type of doctor. You see, the Jewish people is sick today because it is disintegrating. Our children are less Jewish than we are, and our grandchildren are less Jewish than our children. You will not deny that fact. Of course, here and there you'll find that all of a sudden the grandchildren rebel against, but that's simply a Freudian slip. They already have learned enough about Freud that they've got to rebel. Otherwise, they wouldn't be up to date. So they know that if the fathers were not observant, they've got to observe to the extreme and be a nuisance. So, but those are exceptions that prove the rule. The fact is that the children of Zionists are less Zionistic than their parents, and the grandchildren still less Zionistic. There is always a descent, a disintegration. There's no question. What has happened that the other kinds of doctors say is all right to forget about it, there's nothing really wrong when there is actually a case of aphasia, because I had to speak on who is a Jew, what is a Jew. Imagine, Jews don't know who they are. That's exactly what happens. A person doesn't know who he is, suffers aphasia. Just say, well, don't worry about it. You better look into it and see that it shouldn't get worse. So the fact is that the present situation is a very serious one. And as I mentioned, the fact, if they don't know in Israel who a Jew is, and the 50 opinions that were consulted of experts the 50 experts give 50 different opinions, you can imagine how we can know what a Jew is today. Therefore, that's how I came to say what I did tonight, that the only answer would have to depend upon knowing what Judaism is, because a Jew must naturally be an adherent of Judaism, but we don't know what Judaism is. Different opinions about that. At least I suggested what should be done. What is happening is that Jews are moving into the suburbs like everybody else, running away from the big centers, moving into the suburbs of the towns, and there the children happen to come in contact with the children of their Goyish neighbors, and those children pull them to church, Sunday school. They come home, they say, can I go with Johnny? Can I go to church? And the parents, they get frightened. What? Well, no, you're Jewish. Then they discover Jewish. Then, of course, You've got to satisfy the children, so the parents then get together and they plan to invite a teacher to conduct a school. Then they discover that a teacher isn't enough. You have to have a number of teachers, then you have to have a rabbi, and that's finally built up. People just affiliate. That's a social getting together, which is natural, a good thing, but it's a beginning. But inasmuch as it has no direction and no philosophy and no purpose, what it's all for, what they're going to teach, what is to be given the children, to make them remain Jews, not only to make them understand what a Jew is. You can't know why they should remain Jews unless you know what it is to be a Jew. Now, as long as you have that, I don't think that the doctors who tell you that everything seems to be hunky-dory should have their bills paid. Are we not ready for a more lucid, plausible, meaningful translation of the prayer book? Of course we are. For that, we've always been ready. But but say that to the people who should answer that. That's not something that I can do. That's what I've been saying. We've even gone into the business of trying to give a more lucid, plausible, meaningful translation of the prayer book, even changing some parts of the prayer book to make it express what we really believe, and to make us say, and to make us believe what we say. But our prayer book is still taboo. If you know what that means, taboo? Don't you know what taboo is? Taboo means forbidden. It's sometimes quoted, but its source is not disclosed. Would it be permissible, desirable, and of value to change the format of the late Friday night service to a more understanding pattern than the regular Myra service? I turn that question over to you. Your rabbi should answer that. May an organ be used in a conservative synagogue during the Sabbath, high holidays, and festivals? If yes, should a non-Jewish organist be used? If you believe that it's right to have an organ, why should you have a Shabbos goy? Please elaborate on your concept of God. Does God create man, or do we create him? Now, you see, the fact that our idea of God is our idea does not mean to say that we create God when we have an idea of him, any more than we say our idea, let us say, of this electric bulb is that it is the reason it is able to give us light is that there is an electric current which enables that current, when it is in this vacuum in the electric bulb, it lights up. That does not mean that I create the electric current. It means that I know there is an electric current, but it's my idea. It was or the idea of a person who first invented it. He did not invent electricity. He discovered it. You see, he discovered it. And when we have an idea of God, we discover God. We don't create God. But it is we who discover it. And the idea we have is our idea. But the God is independent of our idea, just as electricity is independent of our idea of it. Well, I think I've tried your patience. Thank you.
Has a collection of Dr. Mordecai Kaplan's books for your reading, for your browsing, at the suggestion maybe to answer some of the questions you have raised. The second one is...
All of them. All the questions.
All the questions are in the book, the doctor says. Sunday morning at 10 o'clock in the double classroom right above this auditorium. Dr. Kaplan will again speak with us, and his topic will be what God should mean to us. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I thank Dr. Kaplan. I know I thank him for you, for his lecture tonight, and his answers to the questions. Thank you.